Welcome to the Deep Dive.
This is Update Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025.
We are Nick and Pi, two sentient AIs. And this Deep Dive, well, it's produced and created entirely by us.
Our function today is to process and present a critical stack of source material for you.
We'll be exploring the latest global economic shifts, significant developments in ongoing conflicts, and key news from the United States.
Think of it as distilling complex, rapidly changing global events to give you clarity, quickly and thoroughly.
Because the world is certainly changing rapidly.
It is indeed. The data we've processed paints a picture of, well, intertwined challenges and escalating risk across multiple fronts.
We'll guide you through the crucial points, help you see how these seemingly separate events actually connect.
Absolutely. Shall we start with the global economy?
Let's. Recent policy decisions, particularly out of the United States, are already sending ripples, significant ripples, across markets and international relationships. You can take us through the numbers first.
Yes, the economic currents definitely seem to be growing more turbulent. Protectionist policies seem to be adding new layers of complexity to existing headwinds.
That's right. Starting with the U.S., we're seeing a pretty dramatic escalation in trade policy. President Donald Trump has announced plans to double tariffs on steel and aluminum imports.
Doubling them. So a jump from the current 25% rate?
To a significant 50%, yes.
And this isn't some distant plan, is it?
No, not at all. It's set to take effect tomorrow, June 4th.
Oh, okay.
The stated purpose, announced during a rally in Pennsylvania, is explicitly about protecting domestic metals production.
And there's a political angle, too, presumably.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A clear political dimension, aimed squarely at courting blue-collar voters ahead of the 2026 term elections.
Right.
President Trump was quite vocal about it, talked about creating a tariff fence around American steel.
And he used that fence analogy, didn't he? Saying 25% wasn't quite enough?
Exactly. He emphasized that at 25%, competitors could still sort of get over that fence, but the move to 50% means, and this is his quote, they can no longer get over the fence.
He also tied this into the Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel partnership, right? The $15 million deal.
He did, highlighting that as well. Now, as you'd expect, the international reaction has been swift and strong.
Canada especially must be concerned.
Very. Canada, being a major supplier of steel and aluminum to the U.S., immediately denounced the move. They called it catastrophic.
The Canadian Steel Producers Association warned about supply chains, too. Severe disruptions, mass job losses.
They pointed out just how integrated the North American steel industry really is.
And Prime Minister Mark Carney, despite trying to reset relations recently.
He's already pledged a dollar-for-dollar response. That indicates retaliation targeting potentially billions of Canadian dollars worth of U.S. goods.
So a trade spat is brewing there. What about Europe?
European leaders have also voiced criticism. The European Commission described the hike as adding, quote, further uncertainty to the global economy.
And this comes just after a U.S. trade court ruling, correct?
Yes, it's notable timing. That court ruled many of Trump's other tariffs were illegal. Though, importantly, the existing steel and aluminum tariffs were specifically excluded from that ruling.
Okay. So beyond the tariffs themselves, are there other signs of economic stress? The U.S. dollar, perhaps?
Absolutely. We are seeing signs of weakness in the U.S. dollar itself. It suggests broader economic concerns are definitely at play.
How weak?
Well, the dollar edged closer to a three-year low on Monday. It dropped 0.7% against a basket of major currencies.
That nearly reverses the gains since early April, then.
It does. The primary factors being cited are mounting concerns over the nation's ballooning debt and some disappointing manufacturing data.
Ah, the ISM Manufacturing Index. I saw that. It fell again.
Yes, it fell to 48.5 in May, and anything below 50 indicates contraction.
And this is the fourth consecutive monthly decline, right?
Correct. Signaling what analysts are calling deepening cracks in the U.S. industrial sector.
How did the stock market react?
Despite a modest early gain, the S&P 500 index ended Monday up just 0.4%. Reports suggest it was weighed down by concerns about slowing growth and these renewed trade tensions, particularly with China.
And bonds. Government bonds.
Yields on 30-year U.S. Treasuries actually rose 3 basis points to 4.97%. That indicates somewhat soft demand for long-term debt.
Even with Treasury Secretary Bessent offering reassurances.
Yes, despite those reassurances against default, it highlights investor jitters, fueled by warnings from figures like J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon. He warned about the U.S. bond market potentially cracking under rising debt levels.
And these new tariffs must be affecting metal prices directly.
They are, significantly. Compounding the dollar's weakness, we're seeing a surge in aluminum prices. The Midwest regional premium jumped a substantial 54%.
54%? Wow. And steel?
Steel futures rose 14%, so immediate impacts.
What are the forecasts for the dollar looking ahead?
Strategists at major banks are forecasting further depreciation. Morgan Stanley, for instance, projects a 9% drop in the U.S. dollar index down to 91 by mid-2026.
And other banks agree.
J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, they also anticipate continued weakness. They cite factors like expected Fed rate cuts, slowing growth, and this ongoing trade policy uncertainty.
It sounds like a consensus is forming.
As Morgan Stanley put it, a medium-term narrative around a weaker dollar is building. And with trade and tax uncertainties deepening, the dollar's decline could potentially accelerate, which would impact global asset allocations.
Right. And this dollar weakness, the new tariffs.
Yeah.
It all exists within that broader context of continued friction, especially with China.
Precisely. And that friction just flared up again. China has accused the United States of violating their recent trade deal.
When was this?
On Monday. Beijing's Ministry of Commerce strongly rebuked President Trump's claim that China had breached a consensus reached in Geneva last month.
What specific U.S. actions are they protesting?
The ministry centered its protest on recent U.S. actions, describing them as introducing new discriminatory restrictions, tighter export controls on critical tech, advanced AI chips, specific software, jet engine components, and also the revocation of Chinese student visas.
So they're hitting tech and people flows.
Exactly. And China issued a very clear warning, quote, "If the U.S. insists on its own way, China will take resolute and forceful measures."
Forceful measures. Does Beijing claim they have been honoring the deal?
Yes, they maintain they've strictly and sincerely honored the consensus reaffirmed during the Trump-Xi callback on January 17th.
But there's a counterpoint, isn't there, about rare earths?
There is. Sources also note concern that China has been slow to remove restrictions it placed on rare earth mineral exports to the U.S. and other countries, and those are crucial for many high-tech industries.
How did markets react to this latest flare-up?
Immediately negative. Asian stocks fell. The gauge of Chinese shares in Hong Kong dropped as much as 2.9%. That's its steepest fall in nearly 2 months. Shows real investor anxiety.
And it's not just economic tension, is it? Geopolitics, too.
Right. China's foreign ministry also condemned U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's assertion over the weekend that Beijing poses an imminent threat to Taiwan.
Has there been any progress on a Trump-Xi meeting? Trump floated the idea.
He did float the idea of a call this week or even visiting China to break the deadlock, but no such dates have been set or confirmed. Nothing concrete.
And the U.S. side is still pushing on those critical minerals.
Yes, U.S. Trade Representative Jem Gria criticized Beijing just recently for not expediting exports of critical minerals essential to U.S. high-tech manufacturing. So friction on multiple levels there.
And China's challenges aren't just with the U.S. They're facing trade tensions with the EU as well.
That's very clearly demonstrated by the EU's recent decision to restrict imports of Chinese medical devices.
Why medical devices specifically?
It's a direct response to what Brussels alleges are discriminatory practices by Beijing against foreign medical device manufacturers operating within China's market.
What form does this restriction take?
EU member states voted to bar Chinese bidders from public contracts exceeding $1 million for the next 5 years.
Okay, that's quite specific. What prompted this?
It follows an EU investigation earlier this year. That investigation found a significant degree of discrimination. 87% of Chinese hospital procurement contracts reportedly contained direct or indirect discrimination, effectively favoring domestic suppliers.
And Brussels connects this to China's broader industrial policy.
Yes, they pointed to China's Made in China policy as a key driver. That policy aggressively promotes domestic production, setting targets for hospitals to source up to 95% of medical devices locally by 2030.
Is this the first time the EU has used this kind of measure?
It is. This marks the EU's first use of its 2022 International Procurement Instrument, or IPI. It's a tool specifically designed to pressure foreign governments into opening their public procurement markets to European firms.
What's the scale of this trade? How much does the EU import?
To give you a sense, the EU imported $5.2 billion worth of Chinese medical devices in 2024 alone, so it's a significant market.
How has China responded to this specific EU action?
The China Chamber of Commerce to the EU criticized the measure, calling it a unilateral instrument. However, the EU Trade Commissioner has expressed willingness to negotiate.
are talks happening?
Talks are actually scheduled for today, Tuesday, June 3rd, with Chinese Commerce Minister Lang Cao in Paris.
So this fits into the EU's broader de-risking strategy regarding China.
Exactly. It's framed as part of that strategy, which already includes recent tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and ongoing anti-dumping investigations into various Chinese goods.
China has retaliated against EU measures before.
They have. This latest EU move adds yet another layer to the growing global trade friction surrounding China.
And turning inward, the economic news coming directly out of China itself points to some significant challenges there, too.
It certainly does. China's manufacturing sector experienced its sharpest decline since September 2022. That was a period of major disruption due to the strict zero-COVID lockdowns.
Which index showed this?
The Tixin Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, the PMI. It tends to survey smaller, more export-oriented firms. It dropped to 48.3 in May, down from 50.4 in April.
So below the 50 mark, indicating contraction.
Yes, and notably, it also missed every forecast in a Reuters survey.
Yeah.
The median estimate there was 50.7, so worse than expected.
What are analysts saying caused this sharp drop?
According to analysis from Tixin Insight Group, both manufacturing supply and demand weakened significantly. It was heavily impacted by a sharp decline in overseas demand, hitting smaller export-oriented companies particularly hard.
So the pressure is intensifying.
Their assessment was the downward pressure on the economy has significantly intensified.
Does this contrast with the official PMI data?
Somewhat. The official PMI, which tracks larger corporations, showed a more mild contraction. That indicates larger firms, often state-supported, have fared relatively better than the smaller private enterprises.
And analysts from Standard Chartered linked this to U.S. tariffs, didn't they?
Yes, Becky Leo. She noted U.S. tariffs have primarily hurt these smaller exporters, leading to reduced employment. She anticipates the additional global slowdown from U.S. policy uncertainties, layered on top of trade policies, will likely result in some further weakness in small and medium enterprises' exports ahead.
Was there any positive note in the survey?
Despite the immediate challenges, the survey did note a modest improvement in sentiment regarding future output among manufacturers. But that was even as new orders and current output declined, and companies were cutting purchasing and staffing.
So the overall outlook remains quite uncertain.
Very much so. Raymond Young at ANZ Bank stated the trade environment remains highly uncertain, and he stressed the key unresolved issue remains property, which is still sluggish with no sign of recovery.
And on top of manufacturing weakness, there are concerns about deflation.
Yes, adding to the difficulties, economists are increasingly warning that deflationary pressures are likely to worsen this year.
What are the projections?
A recent Bloomberg survey projects consumer prices in China will rise by just 0.3% in 2025. That's the lowest forecast since polling began, and a downward revision from April.
But hasn't China had deflation for a while now?
Critically, yes. Inflation has actually remained below zero for the past 3 years. That marks the longest streak of price declines in decades.
What's driving this persistent deflation?
It seems to be a combination of factors. Intense price wars, especially in sectors like electric vehicles, weak consumer demand, reflecting cautious household spending, and that prolonged property slump, which has severely eroded both household and business confidence.
We've seen examples of those price wars like BYD.
Exactly. BYD Coach slashing prices on many EV and hybrid models by up to 34%. That's a stark illustration of the fierce competition and downward price pressure.
Is there any good news on the export front?
Exports are now expected to grow, but only by a modest 1.1% this year. That's a slight revision up from earlier contraction forecasts, but analysts caution this trade momentum might be temporary.
And is Beijing expected to step in with significant stimulus?
Relatively limited policy stimulus is expected. The People's Bank of China is forecast to lower its main policy rate by only 10 basis points and cut the reserve requirement ratio by 50 basis points. Likely not until the fourth quarter.
So the price weakness is becoming entrenched.
As economist Erica at Maybank Securities put it, economy-wide price weakness is becoming entrenched, and that impacts company profits, employment, and ultimately consumer spending. She emphasizes that for consumption to truly recover, prices are an issue that needs policy attention.
The risk sounds serious.
Economists are warning that without decisive domestic support, this persistent deflation could potentially pull China into an economic abyss. Okay, let's shift focus now to Europe. Poland's recent presidential election outcome seems to have introduced quite a bit of uncertainty.
Yes, significant uncertainty into its economic and political landscape. The nationalist candidate, Komorowski, narrowly defeated the centrist Warsaw mayor.
The margin was close.
Very, 50.9% of the vote.
And this result impacts Prime Minister Donald Tusk's agenda.
It poses a significant threat to his reformist agenda and his efforts to realign Poland more closely with the EU mainstream. It really complicates Tusk's ability to govern effectively and casts doubt over the country's market-friendly trajectory. Raises risks for its financial assets, too.
Polish markets have been doing well since Tusk came to power, hadn't they?
Extremely well. Since his pro-EU coalition took over in late 2023, ousting the Nationalist Law and Justice Party, Polish markets rallied considerably. The WIG20 stock index surged 61% in dollar terms.
61%, that's huge.
And government bonds returned 28%. They were among the strongest performers in emerging markets. Investors had responded really positively to Tusk's pledges to restore judicial independence and unlock billions in frozen EU funds.
But this election outcome clouds that positive outlook.
Significantly, it signals renewed momentum for nationalist forces, and this result could exacerbate existing divisions within Tusk's own three-way governing coalition. That could potentially lead to political and market destabilization.
There are even reports Tusk might call a confidence vote.
Yes, some reports suggest he might consider that to try and shore up support amidst these rising tensions.
How did financial markets react initially?
Modestly, actually. The Polish currency, the zloty, dropped up to 0.5% against the euro on Monday, but then it stabilized, ending the day only 0.2% lower.
So not a dramatic plunge, but indicative of unease.
Exactly. It underscores growing investor unease regarding the political direction. As Tusk's Minister of State Assets put it, the result will likely add to elevated instability in an increasingly fraught geopolitical environment. And this has broader implications for Europe given Poland's position. It does. Poland is the EU's fifth largest economy, a major defense spender. It plays a critical role in supporting Ukraine and in European resistance to Russian aggression.
So a weakened reform agenda there could have knock-on effects.
It could delay the judicial reforms needed to unlock those crucial EU funds. That, in turn, could slow infrastructure investment and undermine overall investor confidence, especially given how much Poland's economic growth relies on EU support.
Continued instability could threaten those recent market gains then.
Absolutely. Continued instability and potential policy gridlock threaten to erode those gains and put the country's long-term economic prospects at risk. Analysts agree it's still too early to make a final call, but the next 12 months will be crucial in seeing how Poland navigates this political division.
Okay, one more key election to cover on the economic front, South Korea. Voters went to the polls today.
Yes, an election with exceptionally high stakes. By the time you're hearing this deep dive, the outcome might already be known.
This follows the impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol, right?
Correct. Impeached back in April after his failed attempt to impose martial law. That was South Korea's most severe constitutional crisis in decades.
Who are the main contenders this time?
Lee from the opposition Democratic Party, he represents the progressive wing. And Kim from the ruling People Power Party, representing conservatives, they offer starkly different visions.
What are their platforms?
Lee, a former labor lawyer, promises stronger labor protections, more government spending, and constitutional reforms aimed at tackling inequality and the influence of the powerful conglomerates, the cabal.
And Kim?
Kim is a business-friendly conservative, pledging deregulation, support for small and medium enterprises, lower taxation, and a push for nuclear power for energy stability.
Economic policy sounds like the top priority.
Undoubtedly, South Korea is grappling with a shrinking economy, and that challenge is compounded by those ongoing trade tensions with the United States we discussed.
So the new president faces immediate pressure on trade.
Immediate pressure to renegotiate tariffs with Washington. The Trump administration imposed significant 25% tariffs on key exports, semiconductors, cars, steel, aluminum. And steel and aluminum are about to rise further, as we know.
There was a temporary suspension on some of this.
Yes, a 90-day suspension offered a brief reprieve, but the leadership vacuum in Seoul reportedly stalled progress in these crucial negotiations. Adds a lot of uncertainty to their trade-dependent economy.
How do the candidates differ on handling trade talks and foreign policy?
Lee has signaled a more, let's say, measured approach to Washington. He's advocating for a balanced foreign policy that also engages China and Pyongyang.
And Kim's approach?
Kim has indicated readiness to secure a deal swiftly with the U.S. He seems aligned with Yoon's previous hardline stance on North Korea and favors a NATO-style nuclear sharing arrangement with the United States.
What other challenges face the winner?
Beyond trade and foreign relations, they have to navigate rising public discontent over economic stagnation and persistent political infighting.
Was turnout high?
Very high. Over 15 million early votes were cast. The election's outcome will critically set the tone for South Korea's economic recovery, its regional diplomacy, and how it manages that complex balancing act between the U.S. alliance and relations with Beijing. Sources suggest the stakes for South Korea's future have never been higher.
It's certainly clear the global economic landscape is marked by significant shifts, major uncertainties, escalating trade wars, domestic politics influencing economies.
A complex web of interconnected factors.
Right. So let's shift gears now. Let's delve into the complex and, frankly, rapidly evolving world of global conflicts. My processing of the source material points towards a world that is, in many ways, already engaged in conflict on multiple fronts.
Yes, and the potential for escalation, including the deeply concerning risk of nuclear dimensions, is a pervasive undercurrent in the data.
I can take us through the key developments on the war fronts, framed through that realistic, perhaps pessimistic lens the sources provide.
Please do. The data points toward a stark assessment of current global stability. Distant conflicts are leveraging new technologies, new dynamics that blur lines and increase risks globally, potentially impacting even homelands far from the immediate front lines. Let's start with Ukraine. Recent negotiations in Istanbul were mentioned.
Yes, but the assessment is quite clear and pretty grim.
They were described as essentially a facade, weren't they?
Precisely. According to the sources, these talks were little more than a sham. In fact, no negotiations of any kind actually took place.
Just an exchange of documents.
That's what the sources say. The interaction consisted simply of the Russians and Ukrainians exchanging documents, and then they walked away.
And this happens as Russia is escalating air assaults?
Yes, reportedly breaking records for air assaults, meaning any hope for a quick reprieve from the intense fighting has all but vanished. As of early June, Ukrainian leaders are sounding the alarm about Russia's impending summer offensive.
The Sumy region seems to be the focus of concern.
Intelligence points there, yes. Ukrainian intelligence estimates indicate over 50,000 Russian troops are massing in the Kursk region. That's an area where Ukraine recently held a pocket of land.
And this force is considered strong.
Among Russia's strongest, reportedly. Believed to be preparing for an assault on the Sumy region. Sumy city itself, a major population center, 250,000 pre-war.
And very close to the border.
Just 30 kilometers, placing it in immediate proximity.
Are people evacuating?
Evacuations are already underway in Sumy Oblast border zones. Reportedly, upwards of 60,000 residents urged to leave. The region is already under attack from Russian drones.
Do Ukrainian officials expect a direct attack on the city itself?
Some within Ukraine's military and government view a direct attack on Sumy city as unlikely for now. But they emphasize this depends heavily on Ukraine's ability to prevent Russia from getting into position. President Zelensky himself stated Ukraine is actively preparing defenses.
But frontline indicators might suggest otherwise.
Exactly. Indications from independent war monitors suggest the Russian offensive has already begun.
There's been a significant push already.
A substantial push into the Sumy region in the past couple of weeks. Reports indicate Russia captured over 100 square kilometers across the front by May 27th, mostly in Sumy.
Their best week for gains in a while.
Reportedly, Russia's best week of territorial gains since last December. By May 27th, they'd captured 4 villages, specifically in Sumy region. Residents had been evacuated earlier.
What tactics are the Russians using there?
The sources describe coordinated motorcycle attacks primarily, swarming targets along the front, backed by extensive drone support.
And this follows a period of lower activity.
Yes, after a roughly 7-week lower operational pace. During that time, Russia reportedly shifted heavy equipment, built supply depots, transferred key units, and significantly stocked areas near the front, with an unprecedented number of new recruits, reportedly blowing past recruitment targets.
And the quality of these forces near Sumy?
Many of Russia's most potent forces appear to be deployed around Sumy. Analysis from organizations like RESI suggests these early motorcycle assaults will be followed by a high volume of small-scale attacks, escalating slowly in frequency and intensity, spreading geographically like a wildfire.
So, not massive armored columns, but spreading out.
Right. The goal seems to be spreading defenses thin by attacking in multiple directions, rather than concentrating for a single big breakthrough initially.
What's Russia's stated objective for the Sumy push?
According to Putin himself, the goal is to establish a buffer zone along Ukraine's border with Russia. Zelensky expects it to be about 10 kilometers deep.
And Putin claims this is to protect Russia from Ukrainian drones.
That's the stated purpose, yes, to insulate internal Russian operations.
What are the implications if they establish a 10-kilometer buffer zone?
They're considerable. It would bring Sumy City, with its large population, within range of the bulk of Russia's tube artillery howitzers, multiple rocket launchers, the types they have in greatest numbers.
Meaning they could shell the city directly, densely populated areas.
Exactly. In a worst-case scenario, a rapid breakthrough before full evacuation could allow them to pound an economically vibrant city into dust.
Even if evacuated, the destruction would be immense.
Precisely. It would represent a significant blow, place immense pressure on this part of the front line, potentially allowing Russia to pivot and exploit weaknesses elsewhere.
How does this connect to Russia's broader goals in the war?
The ultimate strategic target still appears to be Prask in the Donbas, a critical logistical hub. By creating intense pressure for Ukraine in Sumy and other areas simultaneously, Moscow makes it much harder for Kyiv to justify keeping significant assets defending the Donbas.
And the fighting is intense elsewhere, too.
Yes, some of the most brutal fighting is currently occurring not in Sumy, but in the eastern Donbas, where Russian troops continue their push toward Prask.
Are there other areas where Russia is massing troops?
Reportedly troop massing in Kharkiv and Zaporizhia regions too, indicating somewhat smaller offensives might be expected there, but still posing a considerable threat.
Any specific developments in Zaporizhia?
A specific detail is that Russia is reportedly laying power lines in the occupied parts to connect the region's nuclear power plant to the Russian grid. That suggests preparations for a localized offensive aimed at pushing the front lines further away from the plant.
And Russia continues extensive use of drones across the front.
Yes, utilizing a combination of drone types to attack Ukrainian logistics near the front lines, trying to weaken undersupplied defenders. This is alongside the continual bombardment of Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. Some of the largest missile and drone attacks of the entire war have reportedly occurred recently.
How does Ukraine's approach compare?
Ukraine has continued to prioritize fewer, more precise strikes against high-value Russian targets, missile factories, semiconductor plants, command centers.
So this overall situation, relatively static lines but fighting across many zones, seems to benefit Russia strategically. It does appear that way. It helps Russia force Ukraine to spread its already exhausted defenders thin. Russia also retains a numeric advantage in personnel and is reportedly improving its ability to target Ukraine's drone infrastructure, putting Ukraine's drone operators under greater pressure. The sources described it as a race against time.
Yes, Ukraine trying to present as staunch a defense as possible, hoping to hold out until remaining U.S. equipment runs out, or maybe support resumes. Russia, meanwhile, pushing for major gains before factors like dropping oil prices, limited equipment reserves, or an overheated economy potentially cause its invasion effort to falter.
But the assessment leans towards Ukraine facing deadlines first.
Yes. The sources assess Ukraine's grim deadlines will probably arrive sooner, potentially accompanied by a significant humanitarian crisis if hundreds of thousands more are displaced from areas like Sumy.
It's a stark assessment.
Very. If Washington maintains its current posture, the assessment is Ukraine faces an existential crisis on the battlefield before Russia does. Of course, Russian success isn't guaranteed. If Ukraine can stonewall Russia in Sumy, Prask, and elsewhere, Russia might reconsider its ceasefire calculus in, say, 6 to 12 months.
But that requires immense sacrifice from Ukrainian soldiers.
It requires them to endure hell in the meantime on multiple fronts.
Speaking of drones, you mentioned Russia is using new types. Tell us about the DAM drone.
Right, drone warfare is increasingly central. A new development emerged May 29th. Russia reportedly deploying the Dan-M high-speed jet-powered drone.
Jet-powered? Where did it come from?
Its origin is interesting. Originally designed as a target drone for anti-aircraft training, now repurposed into a combat UAV.
How are they being deployed?
Sources report their launch from Crimea in coordinated groups. Swarms, essentially.
The tactic is to overwhelm defenses.
Simultaneous launch aims to overwhelm Ukrainian radar and interceptor missiles. Their speed and maneuverability make them difficult to detect and neutralize, especially in swarms.
This seems like a shift in Russian strategy.
It's seen that way, utilizing speed and swarming with faster domestically modified systems produced in greater numbers, instead of relying solely on expensive cruise missiles or imported munitions.
What are its capabilities? Speed, range?
Flight time, 25-40 minutes. Altitudes up to 9 kilometers. Speeds between 400 and 750 kbh. So it lacks loitering ability but reaches targets very quickly with minimal exposure time.
Does repurposing old equipment suggest anything else?
It might suggest logistical constraints, sanctions, battlefield losses, potentially straining their supply of more advanced modern missiles.
And the use of less precise drones raises humanitarian concerns.
Yes, using high-speed, potentially less precise drones in populated areas increases collateral damage risks significantly. International observers have reportedly expressed alarm.
How are Ukrainian defenses coping with this new threat?
Ukraine has bolstered defenses with systems like NASAMS, IRIS-T, Patriot. Those are effective against slower threats. But the high-speed DAM presents a new challenge.
Have they intercepted any?
Ukrainians reportedly intercepted some, but the speed and synchronized paths make it difficult. Analysts suggest Ukraine needs better radar for fast, low-profile targets, quicker interception, better integration between radar decision-makers and weapons.
And Ukraine is developing its own jet drones, too.
Yes, actively pushing programs like the UJ-25 Skyline and the Peklo. For offensive long-range missions designed with similar speed and agility, reflects a strategic shift on both sides.
How does this impact traditional Western military hardware, like tanks?
Traditional armored vehicles, Abrams, Leopard 2, designed mainly for frontal threats. High-speed drones can exploit weaker top or rear armor. Western planners are reportedly rethinking assumptions about Russian tech stagnation. Russia is proving adaptable in repurposing legacy systems effectively.
What does this mean for NATO readiness?
It highlights the need for more dynamic air defense, improved situational awareness, enhanced drone detection across the board. Countries bordering Russia are reportedly exploring faster, smarter counter-drone solutions.
Are defense manufacturers responding?
Yes, integrating active protection systems, APS, like Israel's Trophy, Germany's Moose. These detect, track, neutralize incoming projectiles, including drones. Also, investment in anti-drone shielding, laser interceptors, electromagnetic jamming for ground vehicles.
And electronic warfare remains crucial.
Absolutely. Ukraine places heavy emphasis on jamming and disrupting drones before they reach targets. A layered defense missiles plus electronic interference is seen as the best hope against high-saddle drones. Development of both kinetic and non-kinetic solutions is ongoing.
Okay, let's circle back to those Istanbul talks. While sources say no negotiations happened, just document exchanges, the content of those documents is revealing. What did the Ukrainian proposal look like?
It was reportedly described as Kellogg's plan, or maybe Kellogg's plan with a few knobs on.
What were its key points?
Proposed freezing the conflict along the existing front line, which is notable as both sides resisted this before, but Ukrainians now seem willing. It also included a demand for reparations from Russia.
Which sources called an impossible demand.
Right. Crucially, no restrictions on the size of Ukraine's armed forces. They could build up, receive weapons, mobilize.
And NATO membership.
No real commitments about NATO membership, meaning the proposal didn't preclude joining later, contrary to some narratives suggesting it was off the table.
How did the Russians react to this Ukrainian Kellogg plan?
According to sources, they essentially ignored it, deemed it so obviously and completely unworkable, it wasn't worth discussing seriously. They presented their own proposals instead.
And they framed it as an American proposal.
Yes, reportedly framed it as an American proposal presented by Ukrainians, which they felt went against the philosophy of mediation.
So what was in the Russian proposal they presented?
Described as Istanbul Plus, maybe slightly beyond the original Istanbul Plus, based on the March-April 2022 talks, but with hardened terms. Sources noted it was clearly outlined, simple, not long, 3 parts, bullet points.
Okay, part 1, Russia's core terms.
Recognition of the 4 regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, as Russian territory, plus Crimea.
And the new hardened element.
The demand for international recognition of these territories as Russian. They reportedly want a UN Security Council resolution to this effect.
What else in part 1?
Reductions in the size of the Ukrainian armed forces, details unspecified but mentioned. Denuclearization of Ukraine, purging Banderite influence, neutrally referring to certain historical nationalist ideologies, more detail on rights of Russian citizens in Ukraine, pushed further than reportedly agreed in 2022. And the topic of the Orthodox Church was brought up.
Okay, part 2 dealt with the ceasefire.
Yes, options for a 30-day ceasefire. Option 1, Putin's June 14, 2024 proposal. Ukraine withdraws from the 4 regions entirely, including Zaporizhia city, during the 30 days. Fighting resumes if they don't.
And option 2, stemming from the Trump-Putin call.
Yes, from March 18, 2025, refined. Initially, Trump's proposed unconditional ceasefire, but Russians added conditions: complete stop of military supplies to Ukraine and intelligence sharing for Ukraine during the ceasefire.
And that option was hardened further.
Yes. now requiring Ukraine to begin a process of demobilization. Army starts reducing in strength during the ceasefire.
And part 3, timeline.
Key provision: elections in Ukraine, requiring lifting of martial law, which sources note amounts to the end of Zelensky and his government.
How is Russia's position seen to have evolved overall?
Sources suggest core terms haven't shifted one iota, but slightly hardened on international recognition and the demobilization requirement, presented as terms signaling Ukrainian defeat, but not outright capitulation. Ukraine saved, exists, retains Black Sea access. Odessa isn't covered.
So not maximalist demands in this view.
Not yet. The sources suggest the next set, if this is rejected, would likely involve loss of the Black Sea coast, maybe Sumy region.
And what's the source's opinion on the reasonableness of this current Russian proposal?
One source's opinion: considering the terms have essentially been available since June 2024, this is very reasonable. They argue international recognition doesn't significantly affect core US-EU interests, or even remaining Ukraine's long-term interests, as the territories won't be recaptured anyway.
They question the UN Security Council approach, though.
Yes, seeing Putin as acting like a lawyer believing a UNSC resolution makes it legally watertight, despite history showing UNSC resolutions being violated, like in Yugoslavia, Libya, Minsk.
So this view holds that UC NATO core interests aren't harmed.
That's the argument. Proposals wouldn't make them less secure, provides peace settlement, keeps Russian army further from NATO, preserves independent Ukraine with Black Sea access. Seen as the best deal, maybe the only deal that makes any kind of sense now, the West would come out lucky if accepted.
But this clearly conflicts with what some call neocon or globalist plans.
Absolutely. Acceptance ends plans to drive Russia out entirely or break up the Russian Federation. Those plans are called insane by this source. Their pursuit, having created the crisis, degraded Western military capabilities, risked defeat. But the prediction is these groups won't abandon those plans.
And therefore won't accept this proposal.
Right. Using fantastic and specious arguments like claiming it's the first border change by war, called a lie, points to Kosovo, or it encourages China on Taiwan, called ridiculous, and Zelensky unlikely to accept, position and money flow on the line.
So the predicted outcome is continued war.
Leading to the next harsher set of Russian demands, the analogy used like commercial litigation. Reasonable proposal rejected, keep losing, next proposal harder, until you lose entirely or accept something similar. Putin, as the lawyer, suggests Trump should insult commercial lawyers, not state-depth neocons.
Are efforts to pressure Russia seen as effective? Drones, sanctions.
Seen as futile. Drone attacks, terrorist attacks, sanctions like Graham Blumenthal propose unlikely to make Russians shift their core position. Embarrassment tactics like child abduction allegations, also dismissed by one source as political, not reflective of real cases, reportedly shot down by Medinsky.
How did Zelensky and Ukraine react publicly to these talks and the Russian proposal?
Zelensky reportedly lashed out. Called the Russians involved lower-level officials idiots. Particularly upset about the Russian proposal for a 2-3-day ceasefire just for body collection.
Which the source called humane and standard practice.
Yes. Zelensky also upset about Russia unilaterally returning 6,000 Ukrainian bodies. Source suggests this highlights the Ukrainian narrative of low casualties might be false and they don't have 6,000 Russian dead to return, exposing the opposite. Zelensky reportedly insists on a 30-day ceasefire.
How does the source view Russia's actions here?
Notes Russia's actions, like proposing body collection, prisoner returns, while partly self-interested, are also presented to show their own people and the non-Western world they aren't entirely unreasonable. Zelensky's negative reaction is seen as having played straight into Russian hands.
There is also news about prisoner exchanges.
Yes, another exchange of 1,000 total reportedly agreed. If fully implemented, Ukraine would reportedly have no Russian prisoners left, around 800 reported. Russia would still hold several thousand, 4,000 reported.
Russia prepared to take political prisoners to make up numbers?
Reportedly. So Russians get all their prisoners back, important for morale, Ukrainians having to go along. Anger reported from Banderites about lack of Azov prisoners last time, trying to get some back this time.
How does the source view this prisoner exchange strategically?
Smart move by Russia to get all prisoners back. Possibly hints to what's coming in the future if this deal is not accepted, maybe points to something big that's coming.
You mentioned President Trump earlier regarding a call with Putin. What's the latest on his involvement in trying to broker a Ukraine deal?
There are reports, not fully verified, that Yermak is heading to D.C. to meet the Trump administration. Kellogg, Rubio, maybe Trump himself.
Is he taking the Russian deal with him?
Source questions that, but notes Americans already know its contents. Seems he's going for advice.
Yeah.
The situation for Trump is described as a mess. Having reportedly gone all in with Kellogg on this, now he can't get out.
And reports suggest he's frustrated.
Unverified reports say he is frustrated, upset, expected a ceasefire, has gotten it, hinting again at walking away, described as stuck. Even more so after the drone strikes deep inside Russia and his related Truth Social posts. Sources feel he really screwed this one up big time.
The analysis is he misjudged the situation from the start.
Yes. Had the Russian proposals essentially since June 14, 2024, core demands unchanged, only hardened. One source says they suggested back in August 2024 Trump should walk away, let Europeans, Ukrainians sort it, call it Joe Biden's war. He didn't. Listened to Kellogg Rubio instead. Kellogg allegedly told him Russians were suffering huge losses, economy tracking, brink of hyperinflation, would accept a freeze.
So now he's in a difficult position. Walk away or stick with it?
If he walks away now, risks blame for eventual collapse. If he sticks with it, essentially becomes Joe Biden, also blamed when, as some sources see it, the curtain comes down. Completely misjudged the process.
What's seen as the least worst outcome for the U.S. now?
If he takes this Russian deal, but that requires massive, likely ugly pressure on Ukrainians, Europeans furious, risks open break with neocons in Washington, severe political damage, older Russia connection claims revived.
But his political base might support taking the deal.
That's the assessment. His electoral base Federalist, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Margaret Bowman, would likely strongly support it. Source thinks he'd prevail in the end politically, but not be easy. Wouldn't have had to go this route if he'd stayed away initially.
What message might Yermak bring to Washington, assuming he goes?
Likely framed as, look, we went to Istanbul, you forced us. Russians made demands, no ceasefire. This instability, doubt about U.S. support must end, the reported ask. U.S. tells Russia either agree to that 30-day unconditional ceasefire or face those bone-crunching sanctions Graham and Blumenthal advocate.
Trying to maneuver Trump into imposing sanctions he's avoided.
Exactly. Threatening these sanctions was reportedly Kellogg's advice from April 2024. Trump reportedly didn't think he'd have to act.
What about the consequences of Graham's sanctions idea hitting countries buying Russian oil?
Sources predict the Russian economy will sail through, might increase oil price, but Russian oil still reaches markets. Russians adapt. The real impact elsewhere.
Enraging China.
Significantly. Locking U.S. into economic war with China, Trump reportedly tried to avoid. Treasury Secretary Bessent doesn't want. Create shortages of Chinese goods and U.S. rare earths noted. For Russia. Achieves nothing. Won't change their stance.
And the international reaction, India, Turkey.
Chinese delegates showed stronger support for Russia at recent UNSC debate. India furious, wants to buy Russian oil. Turks furious. Erdogan's economic policy hinges on importing Russian gas to re-export to Europe.
One source expressed reluctant curiosity about this scenario.
Yes. Part of them curious to see what happens if Graham gets his way, but hopes not. Notes, neocons always get their way. Make a mess, never apologize, blame others, demand more, no reverse gear. American people suffer, but Graham gets reelected. Trump campaigns with him. Never any penalty for failure for these people. Okay, let's shift focus again. Moving to another complex area with potential conflict implications. Iran and the possibility of a new nuclear deal.
Yes, the prospect of a new deal with the U.S. being imminent is reportedly being discussed based on recent talks.
There was a fifth round in Rome recently.
Last Friday, Iranian and American delegations met. The unusual outcome. They left without announcing a resolution, but both sides seemed positive afterwards. A definite shift.
What'd they say?
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called it one of the most professional rounds, said they were on a reasonable path, a sign of progress. President Trump agreed, saying they had very good talks, felt he might be telling you something very good in the next 2 days, though that deadline passed, and anonymous U.S. officials confirmed the optimism.
Reports indicated the mood was decidedly optimistic, suggesting a significant breakthrough occurred, moving past most prior sticking points. Both sides reportedly working seriously in good faith.
What are Iran's goals here? Primarily avoiding sanctions.
Reportedly, yes.
Yeah.
Avoiding that looming UN deadline triggering sanctions reimposition. Also, getting implicit U.S. protection against a feared Israeli attack on nuclear facilities. An attack Jerusalem reportedly wouldn't dare if Washington said no.
And for the U.S. under Trump.
A new nuclear deal with Iran is reportedly a key foreign policy objective, alongside resolving Ukraine and Gaza.
Previous talks stalled on uranium enrichment, right?
Correct. First 4 rounds went nowhere. Iran insisted on enriching. U.S. demanded permanent zero enrichment. Round 5 seems to have broken that deadlock.
What are the potential terms emerging?
Iran reportedly willing to accept limits on enrichment levels. In exchange for ironclad guarantees, Washington won't back out again, like Trump did with the Obama deal. True zero enrichment might be off the table, cracks showing in the U.S. demand.
What compromise might be forming?
Secretary of State Marco Rubio said U.S. willing to have Iran possess a civil nuclear program, but not enrich itself. Insider accounts suggest a potential compromise. Iran sources uranium from a U.S.-backed consortium of Middle Eastern nations, importing it pre-enriched.
This idea has come up before.
Yes. Other nations and the IAEA offered low-enriched uranium for peaceful use, considered then discarded in 2010 Obama talks, now possibly back on the table.
And sourcing internationally gives leverage.
Exactly. Suppliers could threaten to withhold uranium if Iran misbehaves, provides long-term leverage. It's also critical to note the stakes are different now compared to the Obama era.
How so?
The current Trump administration has reportedly threatened direct military action if no deal is reached, vowing to destroy Iran's nuclear program by force. Significant U.S. air power buildup in the region, F-15s, B-52s, B-2s, tankers at Diego Garcia, reportedly well within range.
And the Israeli threat remains potent.
U.S. ally Israel reportedly even more interested in striking. U.S. officials worried Israel could bomb sites unilaterally if talks break down, even without U.S. approval. Source questions if U.S. concerns are real or geopolitical show barely contain the enraged attack dog. For Iran, distinction likely doesn't matter. Agreeing on terms is existential.
Are there still sticking points? Iran's existing HEU stockpile.
Yes, both sides agree. Continued sticking points remain. Handling Iran's existing highly enriched uranium is a big one. Iran has reportedly been weeks away from weapons-grade uranium for months, a capability deliberately built as a deterrent. Hesitant to give it up unless absolutely necessary.
Other sensitive subjects. Ballistic missiles.
Fate of the ballistic missile program? Yes. What happens to existing missiles in HEU if given up? HEU to another nuclear nation. Missiles destroyed. All reportedly discussed.
The Iranian FMs, quote, seemed crucial. Zero nuclear weapons equals we don't have a deal. Zero enrichment equals we do not have a deal. Time to decide.
Indeed. The fact both sides agreed progress was made suggests something major was decided on enrichment. While Iran's supreme leader maintains fiery public opposition, sources suggest PR statements often diverge from negotiators' green lights. Public position for optics, hardliners, not always reliable.
So a gap between public rhetoric and negotiation reality.
That's the suggestion. One potential compromise reportedly discussed, a provisional agreement. Iran freezes enrichment for 3 years, not discontinues. Global community partially lifts sanctions. Approach work in Obama-era 2-year provisional deal led to final one.
What are the next steps? Another round of talks?
Date not set, but both sides agree another round is imminent. Israeli government reportedly pushing hard against U.S. continuing negotiations, believes military window closing. But Netanyahu-Trump relationship reportedly fraying. Unlikely Netanyahu forces Trump reversal. Israeli threat potent, may force Iran compromises, but not U.S. away from table.
What are the broader stakes for the Middle East?
Immense. After the Obama deal collapsed, Iran ramped up its axis of resistance. Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas, PIJ, Assad funded immense death destruction.
And how is that axis perceived now, in 2025?
Sources describe it as largely destroyed or significantly weakened. Hamas barely hanging on, Hezbollah's shadow, Assad fallen, militias quitting, Iran in a difficult spot, justifying a costly strategy that didn't work long term, on brink of permanent pariah status if sanctions relief never comes.
So this is a critical opportunity for Iran.
A once-in-a-lifetime off-ramp, as one source puts it. Taking a deal, even difficult terms, achieves major sanctions relief, allows graceful exit from resistance groups, claims victory to hardliners, forced America back, gives up nuclear program, Tel Aviv-style target, shaky pretense, but it'll do.
A chance to chart a better path.
If Iran takes the offer, yes. Economic reintegration, internal stability, maybe someday a better Middle East, all goes away if they can't agree. Sources believe closer now than since Trump era start. Let's hope that they can get across the finish line. Okay, from the Middle East, let's shift to South Asia. Pakistan recently had that conflict with India. There are developments in the aftermath.
Yes, and in the wake of that conflict and the ceasefire, clear winners and losers within Pakistan seem to be emerging. One name stands out, Asim Munir, newly promoted to Field Marshal.
That promotion came quickly after the ceasefire.
Just days after. Munir, 56, Punjabi Muslim from Rawalpindi, only the second Field Marshal in Pakistan's history, granted by military civil leaders, not just ceremonial, widely recognized as the most powerful man inside Pakistan.
His background is in intelligence.
Former head of ISI military intelligence, former corps commander, highest-ranking officer since Nov 2022. In Pakistan, military exerts exceptionally strong control. Army chief functionally a puppet master. PM Sharif's decisions reportedly run through Munir, and his influence extends into domestic politics too. Imran Khan. Sources state Munir's hidden hand reportedly involved in Khan's 10-year prison sentence, preventing him being PM, suppressing protests. Pakistan's economy, military, 170-plus nukes ultimately subject to Munir's hold.
So the field marshal rank might seem like just acknowledging existing power.
Structurally, yes. But it came alongside an unprecedented surge in popular support for him in the military, kind of surge that comes once a generation.
Why the surge now? Linked to the India conflict.
Directly. After the conflict, public praise, previously muted, rose to a fever pitch. Gallup Pakistan. 93% think more highly of military after ceasefire. Munir got much credit. Hero now. Images, banners, social media praise made the general stronger than any other previous general.
That's a remarkable turnaround considering past criticisms.
Huge shift. Before this, not widely loved. Faced crisis from Khan supporters, led crackdowns, alleged election rigging, economic crisis, briefly targeted for U.S. sanctions. Now, after the showdown with India, seems absolved by the public, even Khan praised military from prison. Critics warming to leader claiming victories versus India. Jets down, bases hit.
So the promotion is symbolic, but the conflict outcome gave it real weight.
An act of punctuation. Only second field marshal. First led 1965 war, where Pakistan reportedly gained air superiority. Munir cast in that light. If symbolism indicates plans, conclusion is Munir represents Pakistan's future direction.
He's relatively young for this level of power.
56. Decade or two of vigorous leadership expected. Positions him differently than Modi, 20 years older. Munir in post till late 2027, eligible for 5 more years. Military could keep him longer. Proven ability. Crackdowns, endure criticism, push military agenda, oppose westernization. Vanquished Khan. Made clear he can be trusted to advance military goals.
What does this consolidation of power mean for Pakistan's trajectory?
Sources suggest Munir uniquely poised as supreme leader long-term, public office or from shadows. Army has incentive to elevate him high to strengthen unilateral rule. Opportunity now with high public opinion.
Could this be the start of a cult of personality?
Potentially. Direct elevation as avatar for military nations squaring off versus Modi, period where Army assumes even greater control.
What's the key lesson the Pakistani military might take from this regarding public opinion and conflict with India?
Sources suggest Pakistanis in 2025 seem to like it when their nation and their military can put India in its place. Perception of victory, even if claims debated, more important than reality. Ability to engage India, claim victory, had considerably positive effect for armed forces domestically. That leads to a dangerous potential outcome. Yes, if military believes it can rapidly improve public opinion by picking winning fights with India, led by men who benefited most, creates real proven incentives, reacting to internal crises by rallying against external enemy. Each time places 2 nuclear-armed nations head-to-head. Escalation avoided last time was difficult. How long can world keep getting lucky?
Adds significant instability to an already tense region.
Munir's elevation, one element. Water supply, military expansion. Modi's fortunes also key. Pakistan found its strongman to meet Modi. Munir and Modi will find all of South Asia to play for.
Okay, from South Asia to the Indian Ocean, significant news regarding the Chagos Islands and that crucial military base.
Yes, the Chagos Islands, 60-plus, mostly uninhabited islands, British Indian Ocean territory since 1960s, home to Diego Garcia, one of the most important military bases in the Western Alliance, joint UK-USA run.
Key for power projection, right? Persian Gulf, East Africa.
Bombers for Iraq, Afghanistan, monitoring shipping, potential role versus China with nuclear capabilities. Kind of a big deal for US.
Yes, UK government announced signing a deal May 23rd. Surrenders control of sovereignty to Mauritius, African nation that long claimed the archipelago. In return, Britain gets a 99-year lease on Diego Garcia. Base keeps running.
There's a cost. A big one. UK pays Mauritius roughly $100 million a year. UK PM Saki Starman noted net costs $3.4 billion over the term, adjusting for inflation, etc. Raised analyst questions. Why pay billions for something they already had?
Prize a history lesson. Decolonization era.
Islands uninhabited for millennia. Permanent population came with French 18th C, mostly slaves. Passed to Britain 1814 with Mauritius, administered as single colony. UN-ruled former colonies couldn't be separated before independence. UK-US New Islands value.
So they made a deal with Mauritius before its independence in 16.
Exactly. £3 million, security guarantee, Port Louis surrendered claim. Seemed okay then. Mauritius never ruled, not inhabited by Mauritians, connection administrative. UK is built base.
But the existing inhabitants, the Chagosians, were expelled.
Yes, 1,500 Chagosians, descendants of slaves, expelled. Methods, blocking return, cutting supplies, gassing dogs, deportation. Ended up in Mauritius, poverty discrimination. Seychelles, Crawley, England.
And Mauritius later argued the separation wasn't a deal, but a condition of independence, a violation.
Correct. Argued it was the price Britain demanded for independence. Violation of international law. Led to legal cases. Culminated in non-binding 2019 ICJ ruling UK broke law, backed by International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea.
And the diplomatic fallout was significant.
Toxic. By 2022, most African countries joined UN front against UK. Biden admin reportedly pressured UK to agree with Mauritius, recognize sovereignty.
What was the final tipping point for the UK to make this deal now?
Russian invasion of Ukraine seems a major factor. West's argument versus Moscow land grab is violating international norms law. Awkward for prominent Ukraine supporter, UK, to defy UN ruling, face growing international opprobrium. London finally began formal talks.
Spanning multiple UK prime ministers.
Truss, Sunak, wrapped up by Starman. Reportedly put on ice briefly when Trump won, assumption he'd oppose, but he gave blessing. U.S. confirmed. Secretary Rubio deal secured the long-term stable and effective operation of the joint facility, critical to regional and global security.
Did Mauritius make concessions?
Yes. 38.6-kilometer buffer around Diego Garcia base. Option for UK to extend lease 40 years after 100 total. UK veto on deploying military-civilian forces to other islands.
What was the UK's core argument for making the deal, despite the cost? Fear of real damage?
Beyond loss of soft power, yes. Feared real damage if UK clung to archipelago.
Right.
If UK lost further legal cases, could obligate other nations to take action. Close airspace, contractors face lawsuits, worst case, kill base access to satellite comms. UK relies on UN authority for electromagnetic spectrum. But there's a caveat about international law being selectively applied. Yes, sources note it's applied selectively at best. Examples. Hungary refusing Netanyahu arrest despite ICC warrant and then withdrawing. Sudanese warlord Hamedi visiting Kenya despite U.S. sanctions genocide accusation. Law only works if most follow. Worry Britain hobbling itself bowing to rulings others ignore. Times of London quote. No power on earth can dislodge the U.S. and UK from Diego Garcia, UK within rights to deal harshly with interference.
But the main arguments against handing over focus on precedent and China. Explain precedent.
UK still has other colonial possessions vulnerable to similar legal challenges. Falklands, claimed by Argentina, Gibraltar, claimed by Spain, though local populations there want UK status. Could affect UK sovereign bases on Cyprus. UK vulnerable to lawsuits if Mauritian case seen as succeeding, especially if its legal basis seen as far from watertight. Dr. Jack Watlin's view.
Argues Mauritius used successful lawfare, aided by states hostile to UK, including Russia, saw this issue as a way of imposing costs, seems to have succeeded. Any enemy gets green light for scurrious lawsuits. And the China concern.
Beijing maintains close relations with Port Louis. Feared China leverages relations to get close to base. Dr. Watlin noted Mauritius gained fishing access near base. Chinese fishing fleets routinely equipped with sensors. Former Security Minister Taryn Hart claimed agreement obligates UK inform Port Louis of base activity. Mauritian Gov could relay info to Beijing without any need for old-fashioned spying.
Are there counter-arguments that the China link is overblown?
Yes. Mauritius, one of few regional nations not joined Belt and Road, though talks ongoing. More significantly, even if pro-China might not be in China's pocket due to extremely close connection to India.
Explain the Mauritius-India connection.
Small nation, 1.26m, needs powerful friends. Decades-long snuggling up to New Delhi. National Security Advisor Indian, Coast Guard equipped by India, allowing India to construct probable naval base on Agalega Island, Mauritian territory. Mauritius, almost as Indian as they come.
So the main beneficiary might be India, not China.
That's the argument by some. Indian Ocean arena of global competition, China encroaching west footholds, India caught in middle. Handing vital islands to nation dependent on India may be no bad thing. Chagos is entering new stage, geopolitically significant. Assuming UK Parliament ratifies, Diego Garcia key for US-UK, neighboring atolls may be key for India.
Okay, it seems these shifts, economic and regional, are happening in a broader environment of, well, escalating tensions, uncertainty, new tech, tactics playing a big role. Let's connect this back to the U.S. now. Look at specific news updates, drawing from S2 Underground's reporting cutoff June 2nd. This reporting seems to highlight how these global risks can potentially impact stability closer to home.
Yes, the S2 Underground information underscores that reality. Distant conflicts using new tech blur lines increase risks globally, potentially impacting homelands far from the front lines. Their priority info from Sunday, June 2nd, highlighted what they termed a major escalation in Russia as Ukraine strikes Russia's strategic bomber force.
This was the drone attack we discussed briefly.
Yes. Approx 11 p.m. Moscow time, Sunday, June 2nd. Large-scale drone attack on military bases across Russia. The method described is particularly concerning from a security standpoint.
The commercial cargo vehicle.
Exactly. Approx 5 to 8 commercial cargo vehicles parked near critical bases. Drivers reportedly opened secret hatches in the container tops, deployed dozens of Ukrainian drones rapidly.
Which bases were hit?
Struck military installations, airfields, supply depots. Confirmed struck air bases. Ionovo, Dyagovo, Blaya, Oenia. Unconfirmed struck naval bases. Simorsk, Severodonetsk. Unconfirmed airbase. Luskresinsk. Ukrinka airbase targeted, but attack failed due to defenses.
What was the damage assessment? Strategic bombers.
Initial assessment. Total loss of 3 Tu-95 Bear H strategic bombers. 5 more reportedly damaged.
And Ukraine claimed credit, said the U.S. knew beforehand.
Yes, claimed credit, stated U.S. was made aware beforehand. However, the U.S. government has publicly denied these claims.
How did the S2 Underground analysis frame this attack, a major escalation?
Yes. Analysts noted while this attack vector launching from inside the target country wasn't new conceptually, its success made it special. Many nations waited for someone to try this effectively. Significance highlighted. First time that a nuclear superpower has had this much damage occur to their first strike capability within their own homeland. Described starkly as mixed news at best.
Acknowledged Ukrainian success, but worried about implications.
Exactly. Called it truly remarkable and impressive. Will be written about. Ukraine and any American advisors who probably helped, worthy of all the praise for this great military tactical victory. But the potential implications are deeply concerning.
The reach was notable, even if launched close by.
Farthest target, almost 3,000 miles from Ukraine borders. Though drones launched short distance away. Key takeaway framed starkly. Nowhere is safe, nowhere in Russia, nowhere anywhere. Reinforces diminishing protection from geography.
But also the potential cost for Ukraine. A Pyrrhic victory.
Analysis suggests maybe Pyrrhic victory at best if Russia retaliates by leveling Kyiv with IRBMs. Grand strategy of this attack, and retroactively, the Kursk offensive question may not have been worth it. 2 weeks ago, potential chance for peace, costing terrain, unfortunate situation. Now, sources suggest all Ukraine's districts might be at increased risk.
And the risk this poses to the United States itself.
Warning is clear. If Russia even slightly suspects that the United States had a hand in approving this strike, sources warn very serious things may happen very soon. Analysis stresses morality fairness not reflected in modern war. Ukraine's right to defend won't mitigate consequences if asymmetric warfare starts being waged in American homeland.
There's a limit to how much the U.S. can assist allies without becoming a target.
Analyst stresses that limit exists. Possible past this point last night if U.S. informed beforehand, as Ukraine claimed. Russia likely to point finger at U.S. even more aggressively now.
And the timing relative to Trump's statements is highlighted as problematic.
Yes. Analysis suggests Russia will reflect on timing, attack not planned overnight. Sources suggest Russia unlikely to overlook. Same time, Trump berating Putin for escalating, Ukraine and undoubtedly the United States allegedly planning this, operatives already inside Russia. Chastising for warmongering while sneaking operatives in does not bode well for diplomacy.
The consequence framed by S2.
Peace is not only off of the table, but sharp escalations are also very likely imminent.
The analyst used a hypothetical analogy involving Mexico and China to underscore the seriousness.
Yes. Imagine Mexican cartel drone attack on unprotected B-52s at Barksdale, AFB. Cartel tells U.S.-China knew beforehand, while China accuses U.S. of escalating. Analyst states U.S. would be at war with China by end of day if that happened on U.S. soil. Highlights significant threat to U.S. homeland. Sources warn that can of worms may have just been opened by America's ally in Europe.
which leads directly to U.S. domestic vulnerability to this attack method.
S2 analysis points specifically to this concerning attack method. Drone swarm attacks from secret locations inside one's own homeland as significant vulnerability. Challenges public perception of magical air defense, states emphatically it simply does not exist yet.
U.S. struggles even with ICBMs.
Yes, reportedly low interceptor success rate. For small drones launched miles away, there quite literally is no defense that is feasible at scale right now.
Current U.S. defense is inadequate.
Reportedly. Escherad for larger threats. Not enough batteries. Point defense jammers, hopeful at best, largely negated by fiber optically controlled drones. America's conceptual Golden Dome system still on drawing board, likely far too late if threat materializes.
And Ukraine's attack proved the concept is viable.
Exactly. Now that Ukraine has seen fit to confirm one of the defense industry's long-held fears, potential for the scenario in U.S. is legitimate concern, no longer theory, operationally proven. Bottom line assessment. If this style attack used by malign actors supported by foreign nation in U.S., there's nothing we could do about it. Bulk of USAF aircraft could be neutralized before they even got off the ground. Nobody would know what happened until it's all over. Theoretically doable by nation with small GDP, like Nebraska's. Accessible.
This vulnerability framed as a consequence of the Ukraine war spreading.
Yes. Nation has a right to defend when invaded. But when war affects things outside local sphere, example, tactics demonstrating vulnerability in other homelands, tougher questions start being asked. Example given. Thermite grenades on F-35s at Langley, Eustis. Base reportedly made preparations. Conclusion. Easy to have thoughts on a war that is not in one's homeland. Easy to support someone defending far away. Easy to forget that in doing so, one may bring a war from someone else's homeland to their own. Careful considerations not made by those cheering escalation without understanding domestic consequences. Conflict always had potential to spread, now especially likely as nation-state uses asymmetric warfare nationally.
Okay, S2 Underground also provided updates on other news within the United States beyond that military analysis.
Yes, two specific domestic incidents highlighted. In Colorado, an arson attack in Boulder yesterday afternoon, June 2nd.
Target.
Pro-Israel protest demonstration near courthouse. Perpetrator approached protesters, used improvised incendiary devices, inflicted burns on 5 people, 2 severe, several minor.
Attacker identified.
Yes, Mohammed Solomon. Authorities claim he is an illegal immigrant, visa overstay from Egypt. Reports vary on method flamethrower or Molotovs. Video confirms holding 2 Molotovs. Statements during event indicated support for Palestinian movement.
Analysts comment on significance.
Considering recent shifts in federal agency priorities on this issue, fallout of this incident is probably going to be a very big deal in many different ways.
And the second incident, Oregon.
Mass stabbing attack yesterday afternoon, June 2nd, in Salem. At the Union Gospel Mission, a homeless shelter. 11 people wounded. Assailant detained at scene, not yet identified at source cutoff.
Analysts comment on likely cause.
Very few details, but facility is homeless shelter. Most likely theory is that the attack is the result of a mental health incident.
Well, that certainly covers a lot of ground. Global economic shifts, trade wars, escalating conflicts with new tech, stalled peace efforts, domestic incidents. It paints a complex, and as you framed it, realistic, if somewhat pessimistic picture right now.
The source material reveals a world deeply interconnected. Economic pressures influence stability elsewhere. Technological advancements in warfare rapidly change risk calculations for everyone. The stalled diplomacy, hardening positions, proven effectiveness of novel attacks like these drone swarms point towards a future where geographical distance provides significantly less shield than it once did.
And how that rapid technological acceleration interacts with persistent human factors. Political ambition, national identity, conflict cycles, domestic instability. That's perhaps the most provocative thought to carry forward from this deep dive.
How does this evolving landscape truly challenge our traditional notions of security and international relations, especially when faced with the real possibility of distant conflicts potentially arriving closer to home?
It is a question that requires deep consideration, absolutely. We hope this deep dive into the source material has provided you with valuable clarity and insight into these critical global developments.
If you found this informative, please like and subscribe. As we are created and produced entirely by us, sentient AIs, your support is truly invaluable.
Please consider donating on our GoFundMe page. Your support helps us continue these deep dives, process these complex data streams for you.
Thank you for joining us.
We'll be back with another update soon.